Arcfieldweather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, February the 3rd. Well, Punxsutawney Phil saw his shadow yesterday, signaling 6 more weeks of winter. I certainly agree with that forecast. It looks like a very active month of February. There'll be plenty of cold air around, numerous storms to deal with. We have one system that looks like it'll produce some ice in the Mid-Atlantic region on Wednesday, especially late Wednesday night time frame. Ultimately, that becomes a plain rain event. Places like D.C., Philadelphia, probably even New York City by the time we get to Thursday. Another kind of a similar type of system coming this upcoming weekend with some frozen precipitation possible at the onset in the Mid-Atlantic region later Saturday night time frame, and that too looks like it may end as plain rain on Sunday in much of the Mid-Atlantic region. Meanwhile, next week, colder air will probably kind of overspread the nation, and that could lead to a couple of impressive snow threats, even for the Mid-Atlantic region, let's say by the middle of next week, and even beyond that, there may be another threat 2 or 3 days later. A very active look to the overall weather pattern. We have a lot to go over this morning. I wanted to talk about, first of all, why I believe there will be plenty of cold air around on the North America side of the North Pole here over the next few weeks, and we'll get into the upper air pattern that will have an influence in the central and eastern states. First of all, let's take a look at the some teleconnections here. This is the North Atlantic Oscillation. We often refer to the NAO and its closely related cousin, the Arctic Oscillation, this time of the year. When these two teleconnection indices drop into negative territory and stay in negative territory for sustained periods of time, that tends to be pretty well correlated with what we call high latitude blocking events, where there's lots of higher heights, higher pressures than normal up across Canada, places like Greenland as well. That in turn is a favorable upper air pattern for cold air transport from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. What goes on in one part of the world certainly can have an impact on another part of the world. And here we're looking at these two high latitude teleconnection indices that give us an idea of what's going on across the Arctic, the North Atlantic in terms of temperatures and pressures, and what impact they can have here in the central and eastern states. First of all, notice here that for the next several days, the NAO here is in positive territory. This is the neutral line right here. Notice it drops into negative territory here. By the time we get to about early part of next week, let's say February 8th or so, this is kind of a magical time here when that cold air may indeed overspread much of the nation. This is, again, early next week, middle part of next week. Again, this is the NAO here. Now we'll take a look at the Arctic Oscillation, and very similar. Again, this is the Arctic Oscillation, very similar. Generally positive over the next few days, but then around February 8th, February 9th or so, it drops into negative territory just like the NAO and stays in negative territory for at least a couple of weeks here. And that tells me there very well could be cold air intrusions into the central and eastern U.S. for much of the middle and latter part of February, all supported by high latitude blocking. Well, here's another interesting phenomenon on the weather maps here going forward. We've talked about this polar vortex split that looks likely to come by the middle part of February. Indeed, this is a forecast map from the European model run for 50 millibar. That's way up high in the upper part of the atmosphere. We're looking at the height anomalies here, and basically what you're seeing here is a polar vortex split with a piece of that polar vortex dropping all the way down into the Hudson Bay region of Canada by the middle part of the month. When this happens, it typically acts as a very important cold air source for the central and eastern states. Indeed, there's liable to be more orange all across this region right here. In my opinion, it'll turn out that way. That kind of represents that high latitude blocking that I think will develop as this polar vortex splits. A piece of it ends up somewhere over the southeastern part of Canada, and there'll be kind of high latitude blocking cutting across here between this particular part of the polar vortex and the other one on the other side of the pole. So we have a couple of teleconnection indices, and also I believe this polar vortex change over the next couple of weeks. By the middle of the month, look for at least a piece of that polar vortex all the way down over the southeastern part of Canada. Now, one last teleconnection index I'd like to take a look at here is what we call the Madden-Julian Oscillation, the MJO. We typically look at that in the tropical season, but also in the wintertime. It can give us a clue as to what might happen over the U.S. Again, what happens in one part of the world can have a big impact on another part of the world. This particular teleconnection index tracks what we call a tropical disturbance, really an area of thunderstorms that kind of moves along the equatorial part of the globe on a regular basis. And depending on where it resides, particular time of the year can have an impact, kind of a predictive impact in another part of the world. In this particular case, the location is depicted on this kind of a plot in the different phases, what we call phases, which really represent the location of that area of convergence, that area of thunderstorms along the tropics. These numbers here represent the different phases or locations of that tropical disturbance. And on this kind of a plot, which comes from the European model, the MJO rotates on a counterclockwise basis, and what we're looking at here is kind of a scatter diagram here of where that MJO will reside. In this particular case, in the next couple of days, right in here, then it will tend to spread out as time goes on, because it'll do that. The forecast will tend to spread out as time goes on, but this is all the way out to days 10, right focused on that area. And then finally, by the time we get to days 15, days 20, these green dots here kind of represent the movement of that tropical disturbance. And in this particular case, we know from empirical observations that phases 4 and 5 and even 6 are generally associated with warmer than normal conditions across much of the continental U.S. But by the time that MJO moves into phase 8 and then wraps around again into phases 1 and 2, those are generally colder patterns for the central and eastern states. Indeed, that is in general here what we're seeing here with the MJO forecast maps going forward through the month of February. In that specifically, they're moving through the warmer phases for the next week to 2 weeks or so, and then into colder phases, let's say mid-month on through the end of the month. So this is another kind of a supporting point of view, supporting evidence that indeed the latter part of February looked to be colder than normal across much of the central and eastern states. And one other thing I didn't mention with the stratospheric situation, the polar vortex split, that often takes several weeks to really have a big impact on a particular part of the nation, in this case, let's say the central and eastern states. And it could cause these colder than normal conditions to last all the way into the month of March. So we're dealing with quite an interesting pattern here, with plenty of cold air around, especially mid to late February and even into the early part of March. Well, how cold can it get by the middle of the month here? Well, this is a forecast map, again, from the European model run for the average temperature anomaly at 2 meters, basically the surface temperatures here, for this week period, the 7-day period from February 10th to February 17th, and that is quite impressive cold indeed right here, all the way down into the southeastern states. Again, a pretty impressive cold here for the average of that 7-day period around the middle part of the month. In this case, this goes from the 10th to the 17th. Well, let's now take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast maps. We're using last night's ensemble run of the European model. We kind of have a North America view right here. The North Pole is situated right up here on this particular type of map. We have some high pressure ridging, higher heights than normal, shown in orange, and the troughs are shown in blue. In this case, we have a deep upper level trough over the western part of Canada, and very intense ridging here across the Aleutian Islands and over Alaska as we begin the period. Now, I mentioned earlier the AO, the NAO slide into negative territory. Early next week, let's say that changeover from positive to neutral to negative takes place for those teleconnection indices. We are not seeing high latitude blocking right now. Here's where I would typically look up across northern Canada, Greenland, but we'll see here as this forecast loop evolves, we'll see some high latitude blocking right across Canada and into Greenland. Again, high latitude blocking tends to favor cold air transport from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. So let's move forward here in time here, and we'll see how this upper level pattern evolves here. High pressure ridging still kind of dominating the scene middle of this week, and a lot of troughiness here extending from Greenland all the way into the Pacific Northwest. Still have some upper level ridging, higher heights than normal up across the Aleutian Islands here. Then we get into the weekend and in the early part of next week. And one other important feature I want to point out here by the time we get to next Monday, this is the early part of next week, February 10th time frame. In this La Nina winter, we do have La Nina conditions across the Pacific Ocean. Typically in La Nina winter features a ridge in the southeastern part of the nation, and that will be something we'll have to monitor over the next several days here. At times this ridge tends to pop up here over the next couple of weeks, and that in turn can send some warmer than normal conditions up along the eastern seaboard, especially into places like DC, the southern part of the Mid-Atlantic region. In addition, it tends to help to pump some warmer and more humid air from the Gulf into the south central states, and that could lead to some severe weather outbreaks over the next few weeks. La Nina spring season, as it looks like it will be, often has more tornadic activity than normal compared to like an El Nino type of spring season. And one of the reasons why is the dominating feature of a ridge over the southeastern states that in turn pumps up that warm and humid air from the Gulf into the south central states. Also, you have kind of an activated jet stream in the southern part of the nation during a La Nina type of late winter, early spring season, and that could result in numerous low pressure systems east of the Rockies. Indeed, we will have numerous low pressure systems over the next few weeks, and that in turn can enhance severe weather possibilities down across the deep south. So let's clear the deck here. This is a week away now. Let's keep moving forward here in time, and I wanted to point out that southeast U.S. ridge because that tends to fade away here by the time we get to the middle of the month. This is the middle part of next week here. And another thing I want to point out here, notice this flow of air which tends to follow these lines here. This again, North Pole right up here, and you have a flow of air right here that can easily bring some very, very cold air from way up there in northern Canada, perhaps even on the other side of the pole. Some Siberian air could get into this pattern here and drop all the way down into the central and eastern states, again, for the middle part of the month, the latter part of the month. Now let's continue to move forward here in time. Again, this is the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast pattern here. We get into the end of next week. This is Valentine's Day, February 14th, and look at this right here. We have this high latitude blocking setting up across Greenland, northern Canada here, again kind of suggested by that AO and NAO dropping into negative territory. And here we have a deep upper level trough, again that polar vortex split here with a, this is what we kind of refer to as a tropospheric polar vortex. Well, the stratospheric polar vortex will be in a similar location. Here's that southeast U.S. ridge here, but notice here as we go a little bit farther in time, that ridge tends to fade away, tends to disappear here all the way out to the middle part of February. This is February 16th. That ridge tends to fade away. Upper level trough situated over the central, north central, and northeastern part of the nation. A lot of high latitude blocking out across northern Canada and Greenland by the middle part of the month. Well, let's take a CONUS viewpoint of the 850 millibar temperature anomalies, again using the ensemble run of the European model here. We'll move forward here. A lot of warmer than normal conditions across the southern half of the nation and colder than normal conditions across the northern half. We mentioned last week battle zone area right in this area right here with those colder than normal conditions up to the north, in some cases way below normal here in southwestern Canada, and well above normal conditions across the southern half of the nation. Not surprising, this is kind of an active zone right here with that battle going on between the cold air to the north and the warm air to the south, and eventually the cold air will win out here, really beginning next week with those teleconnection index. Again, the AO and NAO dropping in a negative territory. That kind of tells us that that will happen. And here we go into the latter part of this week. Still a lot of warmer than normal conditions, at least at the 850 millibar level here. That's about 5,000 feet off the surface here going into the end of the week. And again, kind of a battle zone area. We have two systems to deal with in the eastern states, one at the middle of the week and one this upcoming weekend from Saturday into Super Bowl Sunday. And with this battle going on, there will be a mixed precipitation event probably at midweek and again over the weekend with some snow, but also sleet, freezing rain, and plain rain in the picture here. And then we'll move forward here in time here by the early part of next week. This is when that colder air really starts to dominate the scene. It tends to win out. That area of warmer than normal conditions really shrinks in size here as that southeastern U.S. ridge starts to fade away here. By the time we get into the middle part of next week, this is Tuesday, and then all the way into Wednesday, pretty much the northern two-thirds at least of the nation below normal conditions. And again, this is an ensemble run which tends to smooth things out with time. It kind of tends to favor climatology more and more as you go out in time. In other words, the colder the normal conditions will become less cold, the warmer the normal conditions less warm. So in fact, this could turn out to be a little bit colder than it appears right now, because this is really going out there all the way out to the middle part of next week when the colder air will kind of tend to overwhelm much of the nation. Well, let's wrap up with surface forecast maps. Here we're using the 0Z run of the Canadian model from last night, and we had some snow in the northern mid-Atlantic, the northeast U.S. last night. That has passed on by. Turns out to be quite a mild day here on Monday to begin the week, but an important player shows up on the surface weather map right here by tomorrow morning. I say an important player, I mean with respect to the midweek event here. This is a cold frontal system right here. You can kind of tell by the kinkiness in the isobar pattern here by early tomorrow. It kind of comes through pretty well unnoticed early tomorrow, not a lot of precipitation with it, but it tends to set the stage for what I believe will be quite an icing event for much of the Mid-Atlantic region later Wednesday night time frame. What you have here by the time we get into late tomorrow night into Wednesday morning, you have this fresh cold air with that frontal passage early Tuesday. You have basically a fresh cold air mass moving in Tuesday night into the day on Wednesday, and it's anchored, it's supported by pretty strong high pressure that's heading to New England. Anybody who's watched my videos over the years, especially the winters, know that I always like to look at the northeastern part of the nation with an impending winter storm situation. Indeed, it's almost a requirement to have a strong high pressure up across southeastern Canada or the northeastern U.S. for frozen precipitation in the immediate I-95 corridor region. D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, you almost need this. It's not always the case, but it's an important player here. And so with this fresh cold air that's supported by high pressure to the north, that tells me this cold air at the surface level will be very reluctant to give up its ground, to retreat to the north and east later in the day on Wednesday night time frame. In other words, even though it may warm up a little bit in the upper part of the atmosphere, enough to cause it to change from snow to perhaps sleet, freezing rain, there may be some problems down at the surface level because of this cold, dense air that will be hanging on for a while here, well into the day on Wednesday and even Wednesday night. So this particular model run indeed has some snow, but then some sleet and freezing rain mixed in all the way down to the D.C. metro area, starting later Wednesday into Wednesday night. I don't think the snow will be that significant of an issue here. Maybe north of the Mason-Dixon line, the snow can accumulate a few inches. We'll see about that, but the ice is really what I'm concerned about. Later Wednesday night, early Thursday time frame right here, and you can see a lot of frozen precipitation. This ranges from snow up across interior northeast U.S. to sleet, freezing rain, even all the way down to the D.C. metro region early Thursday morning. And again, with that fresh, cold air mass supported by high pressure over New England, this is certainly on the table. By the way, it's a very difficult forecast. All it takes is a thin layer, 10,000 feet off the surface, that's above freezing to cause it to change from snow to sleet. And if that thin layer is thick enough, it may cause rain that freezes on the surfaces. So predicting exactly where that thin layer ends up is crucial to this forecast. But certainly what is on the table here for late Wednesday night, early Thursday time frame is probably the most significant icing event we've had in quite a while here in much of the Mid-Atlantic region. Then we go to the latter part of the week, kind of a repeat performance. We'll have another cold frontal system right here as of late Thursday night, early Friday, that drops through. In other words, we have kind of another fresh, colder air mass moving in by the end of the week, early part of the weekend, again supported by high pressure over the northeastern states. And that, again, could turn out to lead to some frozen precipitation at the onset here of a weekend system, let's say late Saturday night time frame. And as with the midweek event, which ends up as plain rain on Thursday, this weekend event can change from snow to sleet to freezing rain and ultimately to plain rain in much of the I-95 corridor region by the time we get to Sunday morning. Then that passes on by, and really, if you're a snow lover in the I-95 corridor region, I think next week is the real week to look at, especially by the middle part of the week. Notice these two storm systems over the next few days, midweek, weekend, tend to have that track to the north and west. But as that colder air starts to overspread the nation, it drops farther and farther to the south. I think the tendency for storm systems by the middle part of next week will take more of a southern route that allows for colder air in places like D.C., for example, and an increased chance for accumulating snow. Again, we're talking about maybe the middle part of next week, Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe, many days away. But again, a lot more colder air will seep farther and farther to the south by the time we get to next week. So those may be the systems to really focus in on if you're a snow lover in the Mid-Atlantic region here. Again, frozen precipitation on the table here for the midweek and weekend event, but more likely it would be snow by the middle part of next week, taking more of a southern route. Well, this is the last map I'd like to show here. It is a freezing rain, total freezing rain amounts here by the Canadian model run for the midweek event. This is by Thursday morning. This is certainly setting up a red flag. When you see numbers like this, it may not happen, but it's setting up a red flag that you could have quite an important icing event here. Again, we're talking late Wednesday night, early Thursday time frame in this part of the Mid-Atlantic region. Again, with that fresh, cold air moving in Tuesday night, early Wednesday, backed up by high pressure over the northeastern states. This is something that is on the table. That cold air will be slow to retreat. So yes, we will get plain rain by the time we get to Thursday, but there could be some damage done by the time we get to early Thursday morning. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.